The sun cast long shadows across Washington, D.C., as the former president sat alone in his Mar-a-Lago office, the golden light of late afternoon warming the rich wooden paneling around him. A plain manila envelope had arrived earlier that day, hand-delivered by a former aide who'd refused to say where it came from. For hours, the envelope had remained untouched on his desk while he attended to other business, made calls, and met with supporters planning his political comeback. Now, with the day winding down, he finally reached for it. The weight felt substantial in his hands. No markings, no return address, just his name handwritten on the front in block letters. He slid his finger under the seal and pulled out a stack of papers, some printed emails, and what appeared to be classified documents with most of their content still visible despite attempts at redaction. His eyes widened as he scanned the first page. These were private communications, emails that had supposedly been deleted years ago. He recognized the names, the dates, the references to events surrounding the Benghazi incident that had haunted American politics for years. His heart began to race as he realized what he was holding. "This can't be real," he muttered, shuffling through more pages. But the formatting, the language, the timestamps, everything looked authentic. If these documents were genuine, they would upend years of official narratives about what really happened during that tragic night in Libya, and who knew what, when. He reached for his phone and paused. Who could he trust with something this explosive? The wrong move could discredit everything before it saw the light of day. He needed people who understood both politics and intelligence, people who could verify authenticity without leaking to the press. He called his former chief of staff first. "I need you here tomorrow. Don't tell anyone you're coming," he said simply. Next was a retired intelligence official who'd supported him through both campaigns. Finally, he contacted a trusted lawyer who specialized in government classification issues. That night, sleep eluded him. He paced the length of his residence, stopping occasionally to look out at the Atlantic Ocean. The political implications were enormous. His opponents would say it was fake, a desperate attempt to rewrite history. The media would be divided before they even saw a single page. But if the documents held up under scrutiny, if they really did reveal what they seemed to, it would vindicate years of accusations and forever change how the public viewed one of his chief political rivals. By morning, dark circles rimmed his eyes, but energy coursed through him like electricity. This could be bigger than any revelation during his presidency. This could reshape American political history. His former chief of staff arrived first, a tall man with silver hair and a military bearing that hadn't faded with retirement. "This better be important," he said, accepting a cup of coffee from an aide. "It's more important than anything we've dealt with before," the former president replied, leading him to a secure room where the documents were now spread across a large table. The intelligence expert arrived an hour later, followed shortly by the lawyer. None of them knew why they'd been summoned, and all looked surprised to see each other. They exchanged awkward greetings, the tension in the room palpable. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," the former president began. "What I'm about to show you needs to stay in this room until we decide how to proceed." He gestured to the documents. "These were delivered to me yesterday. They appear to be emails and classified communications related to Benghazi that were supposedly destroyed years ago." The room fell silent as the three visitors approached the table. "If these are authentic," he continued, "they contradict the official testimony and show a pattern of deliberate misinformation to Congress and the American people." The intelligence expert picked up the first document, examining it with narrowed eyes. "Where did these come from?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "The source wants to remain anonymous for now. That's part of what I need you to help me with. Are these real? And if they are, what's the best way to verify them so they can't be dismissed?" The lawyer pulled reading glasses from his pocket. "Even if they're authentic, there are serious legal questions about how they were obtained and whether they can be disclosed." "I understand that," the former president replied. "But the American people deserve the truth about what happened that night, about the decisions that were made and the lies that were told afterward." For hours, they examined the documents, comparing details with publicly known information, looking for inconsistencies or signs of fabrication. The chief of staff took methodical notes. The intelligence expert made calls to former colleagues, asking hypothetical questions without revealing what he was looking at. The lawyer researched precedents for how similar revelations had been handled in the past. As afternoon approached, they gathered around the table again. "Well?" the former president asked, looking at each of them in turn. The intelligence expert spoke first. "I can't be 100% certain without access to verification systems, but based on formatting, terminology, and details that match with what I know, yes, these appear genuine." The chief of staff nodded in agreement. "The timeline aligns with events as we understood them, but these fill in critical gaps that were never explained." The lawyer looked more cautious. "If you go public with this, you need irrefutable authentication. They'll throw everything at discrediting these and you. And there are potential national security implications." The former president walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured lawn. The weight of what he'd discovered settled on his shoulders. This wasn't just about political vindication anymore. It was about historical truth. "We need absolute verification," he said. Finally, "I won't move forward until we're certain. Start reaching out to people who can help authenticate these without revealing what we have. Former officials, technical experts who can verify digital signatures, anyone who might have been privy to these communications." His chief of staff looked concerned. "That widens the circle considerably, increases the risk of leaks. I know, but we need to be bulletproof on this. No loose threads. No questions about authenticity." The former president turned back to face them. "Set up a secure communications channel for this team only. Nothing in writing unless it's hand-delivered. I want daily reports on progress." As his visitors prepared to leave with their assignments, the former president felt a complex mix of emotions. There was vindication, certainly. He'd been saying for years that the American people hadn't been told the truth. But there was also a sense of genuine sadness about what these documents revealed. Political calculations taking precedence over transparency, careers protected at the expense of truth. That evening, alone again in his office, he reviewed copies of the most significant documents. One email in particular caught his attention, sent just hours after the attack, acknowledging it was a planned terrorist operation, while the public was being told it was a spontaneous protest. Another showed coordination between the State Department and friendly media outlets on how to frame the narrative. He leaned back in his chair, the reality of what he now possessed sinking in. These weren't just political ammunition. They were pieces of American history that had been deliberately hidden. The truth about decisions made under pressure, about lives lost and the aftermath managed for political convenience. "The American people deserve better," he said to the empty room. "They deserve the truth, whatever it is." Outside, the sun had set completely. The former president gazed at the darkened grounds of his estate, knowing that the information he now possessed would soon cast light into corners of Washington that had remained deliberately shadowed for years. Whether that light would cleanse or burn remained to. 3 days had passed since the documents arrived at Mar-a-Lago. The small team worked in careful secrecy, operating from a windowless room that had been swept for listening devices twice daily. The former president insisted on these precautions, not out of paranoia but experience. He'd seen how Washington worked, how information leaked when it was convenient for someone's agenda. On this morning, he entered the room to find his former chief of staff staring at a laptop screen, rubbing his eyes from what had clearly been a long night of work. "You look like you haven't slept," the former president remarked, setting down 2 cups of coffee. "I haven't," the chief of staff admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "But it was worth it. We've made progress." The former president pulled up a chair. "Tell me." "We've found someone who can help verify these documents. A tech specialist who worked on the email security systems during that administration. He's willing to look at the digital signatures and metadata without asking why. Can we trust him? He hates politics, voted third party in every election. All he cares about is the technical challenge. And I've convinced him this is about historical accuracy, not a political hit job. The former president nodded slowly. Good. What about the content verification? That's more complicated. The chief of staff slid a folder across the table. We've cross-referenced what we can with public records and testimonies. Some details match perfectly, which supports authenticity. But the most explosive claims, the ones about prior knowledge and the deliberate misleading of Congress, thus are harder to verify without someone from the inside. The former president flipped through the papers, scanning the notes and analysis. What about the guy who served as Deputy Director of Intelligence for North Africa back then? He retired. Last year moved to Montana or Wyoming, someplace quiet. Wyoming, the chief of staff confirmed. Already thought of him. Made contact through mutual connections. He's cautious but curious. I think he'll talk to us if we go to him. Just then the lawyer entered, carrying his own stack of papers. Morning, he said, nodding to both men. I've been researching the legal implications. It's a minefield. I expected nothing less, the former president replied. Give me the worst-case scenario. The lawyer sat down heavily. Worst case, you could be accused of mishandling classified information, even though these were sent to you unsolicited. The person who leaked them is definitely facing federal charges if identified, and there are complex questions about whether some of this information is still classified. And the best case? Best case is we find a whistleblower protection angle. Someone inside the system who went through proper channels first but was ignored. That changes the legal landscape significantly. The former president stood and paced the length of the room. So we need to find the source. Eventually, yes, the lawyer agreed. But that person clearly wants to remain anonymous for now. Can we at least determine if they had legal access to these documents? That would tell us if these were stolen or if the person had authorization to view them. The intelligence expert, who had been quietly listening from the corner, finally spoke up. Based on the document classifications and distribution notes, these would have been accessible to maybe 30 people at most. Senior State Department officials, certain White House staff, specific intelligence personnel. So our source is likely one of those 30? Or someone who had access to their communication systems, an IT person, an assistant with the right clearance. The former president nodded thoughtfully. Let's continue with verification first. I want to be absolutely certain before we take any next steps. Over the next 2 days, the team worked methodically. The tech specialist confirmed that the email headers and digital signatures matched the authentic patterns from that time period. If these are fakes, he told them, they're the best I've ever seen. The timestamps, routing information, server fingerprints, all consistent with genuine communications from those accounts. Meanwhile, the chief of staff had flown to Wyoming to meet with the former intelligence official. He returned looking grim but satisfied. He wouldn't look at the actual documents, said he didn't want that liability, the chief of staff reported. But I described certain key details, and he confirmed they align with what he remembered. He said, and I quote, there were inconsistencies between what we were reporting up the chain and what was being told to the public. Those inconsistencies bothered many of us. By the end of the week, the team had compiled a comprehensive verification report. The former president reviewed it carefully, making notes in the margins, asking questions where the evidence seemed thin. We're at about 95% confidence, the intelligence expert summarized. Without access to government verification systems, that's as good as it gets. Is it enough? The former president asked the lawyer. For the court of public opinion? Probably. For legal purposes, it's borderline. We'd be stronger with a named source willing to testify. The former president leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled before him. Let's talk about how to proceed. If we go public with this, the attacks will be immediate and vicious. They'll say the documents are fake, that we manufactured them for political purposes. We could release them to multiple news outlets simultaneously, suggested the chief of staff. Conservative and mainstream. Let them verify independently. The lawyer shook his head. Too risky. Some might publish without proper verification. Others might sit on them or selectively report. What about a direct approach, the former president mused. I could request a private meeting with her, show her what we have, give her a chance to explain before it goes public. The room fell, silent as they considered this unexpected suggestion. You want to warn her? The intelligence expert asked, clearly surprised. Not warn. Confront, face to face. I want to see her reaction when she realizes these weren't destroyed after all. And, yes, offer her a chance to give her side before the world sees these. The chief of staff looked skeptical. She'll never agree to meet without knowing why. She will if I tell her it concerns national security and her legacy. Her curiosity will get the better of her. Later that night, after the others had gone, the former president sat alone with the documents spread before him. The weight of what he was considering pressed down on him. This wasn't just politics anymore. This was history, accountability, truth. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. He opened it cautiously. I see you're proceeding carefully with what I sent. Good. There's more where that came from. But be warned, powerful people will do anything to keep this buried. The former president stared at the message for a long time. The source was reaching out directly now. This changed things. He typed back, "Who are you? Why did you send these to me specifically?" The reply came quickly. Because you'll actually do something with them. Others would bury them out of party loyalty. As for who I am, someone who was in the room when the decision was made to mislead the public. Someone with regrets. The former president felt a chill run down his spine. This was someone from the inner circle, someone who had been there. I need to know I can trust you, he wrote back. And eventually, the American people will need to hear from you directly. Minutes passed with no response. The former president wondered if he'd pushed too hard. Then, not yet, but soon. First, verify everything. Build your case. I'll provide more when you're ready. They're already suspicious. Unusual activity on old servers, people asking questions who shouldn't be asking questions. The former president read the message twice, then deleted the conversation. He'd have the number traced tomorrow, though. He suspected it would lead nowhere. Whoever this was, they knew how to cover their tracks. He gathered the documents into a secure briefcase and locked it. Tomorrow they would begin planning the confrontation, a private meeting that could change the course of American political history. And somewhere out there, a source with more information was watching, waiting, perhaps gathering courage to come forward. As he left the room, he felt both the burden and power of what he now possessed. The truth, or at least pieces of it, about a night that had been obscured by politics and convenience for to the morning air was crisp as the former president's motorcade pulled away from his Florida estate. He sat in the back seat of the armored SUV, the secure briefcase resting on his lap. Inside was a carefully selected portion of the documents, enough to prove he wasn't bluffing, but not everything. Never show all your cards at once. That was a lesson from his business days that had served him well in politics. His chief of staff sat beside him, reviewing notes on a tablet. She agreed surprisingly quickly, he remarked, not looking up. I told you she would. The former president gazed out the window at the palm trees flashing by. Curiosity. It's a powerful motivator. That, and she's worried about what I might have. The meeting location had been a delicate negotiation. She had initially suggested her foundation offices in New York, but he refused to enter what he called her territory. He proposed Mar-a-Lago. She flatly declined. They eventually settled on a neutral location, a private room at a discreet hotel in Washington, D.C., owned by someone with no strong political ties. Security teams from both sides had swept the room that morning. No recording devices would be allowed, though both would bring a single aide to take notes. The former president had insisted on this condition. He wanted a record of whatever was said. As the plane took off, he thought about the message from his anonymous source. There had been 2 more exchanges since that first contact. The source had provided details that further authenticated the documents, including names of people who had been in specific meetings, details that weren't in the documents themselves, but matched with what the intelligence expert remembered. "What's your gut telling you?" the former president asked his chief of staff as they reached cruising altitude. The man considered the question carefully. "That we're dealing with someone who was very close to her, someone who felt betrayed, perhaps. The tone of those messages suggests personal disappointment along with the political concerns. Someone from her inner circle turning on her," the former president mused. "That tracks with what we know about how she operates. Loyalty only flows one way." The flight to Washington was just under 3 hours. The former president spent it reviewing his approach, occasionally making notes on a small pad. This confrontation had to be handled perfectly. Too aggressive, and she'd walk out. Too accommodating, and she'd think it was a bluff. When they landed, another motorcade waited to take them to the hotel. The capital city spread out around them, its monuments and government buildings a familiar sight to the former president. His city had been his home for 4 years. Years of constant battles, victories and frustrations. Now he was returning with what might be his most significant weapon yet. "She's already arrived," his chief of staff informed him, reading a message on his phone. "Her security team says she's been there for 20 minutes. "Of course she has," the former president snorted. "Always trying to establish the upper hand. Let her wait a bit longer." But when they arrived at the hotel, he didn't delay. This wasn't about petty power plays. The private elevator took them directly to a secured floor. 2 of her security personnel stood outside a door at the end of the hallway, their expressions professionally neutral as the former president approached. One opened the door without speaking. The former president entered a spacious hotel suite that had been converted into a meeting room. A large table dominated the center with chairs on either side. And there she was, his former political rival, the woman he'd faced across debate stages and campaign trails, the woman whose emails and actions surrounding Benghazi had been the subject of so much controversy. She looked older than he remembered, but her eyes were sharp as ever as she rose from her chair. Her aide, a younger woman with glasses and a severe expression, remained seated, a notebook open before her. "This is certainly unexpected," she said, extending her hand. Her voice was cool, professional. The former president shook it briefly. "Thanks for agreeing to meet. Your message was intriguing. A matter of historical record and national importance that requires my personal attention." She gestured to the chairs. "I'm curious what could be so important that you'd request a private meeting after all this time." They sat facing each other, across the table. The former president placed his briefcase before him but didn't open it yet. "I'll get straight to the point," he said. 3 weeks ago, I received a package containing emails and classified communications related to Benghazi, emails that were supposedly deleted or destroyed years ago." Her expression didn't change, but he noticed her hands tighten slightly where they rested on the table. "Really?" she said, her tone dismissive. "And you brought me here for another rehash of that tired story?" "Not a rehash," the former president replied evenly. "New information, documents that directly contradict your testimony to Congress and the American people." Her aide was writing furiously now. The former president's chief of staff did the same. "I've testified for 11 hours straight on this subject," she said. "Every investigation, including those led by your allies, found no wrongdoing. So unless you have something truly new, this seems like a waste of both our time." The former president opened his briefcase and removed a thin folder. "I've had these documents authenticated by experts. The digital signatures match. The timestamps are correct. The server information is consistent with State Department protocols from that time." He placed the folder on the table between them but kept his hand on it. "Before I show you what's inside, I want to ask, is there anything you want to clarify about your previous statements regarding Benghazi? Anything that perhaps couldn't be said publicly at the time?" Her eyes flicked to the folder, then back to his face. "My statements stand as given under oath. I have nothing to add or retract." He nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. "Then, let me show you what I have." He opened the folder and slid it toward her. Inside were printouts of 5 emails carefully selected from the larger collection. She pulled the folder closer, putting on reading glasses to examine the contents. The room was silent except for the soft sound of papers being turned. The former president watched her face carefully, looking for any reaction. For nearly a minute, her expression remained neutral, practiced. Then he saw it. A slight widening of the eyes, a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw as she read the third document. She looked up at him, her voice steady but with an edge to it. "Where did you get these?" From someone who had access to them. Someone who believed the truth should come out. These are classified communications. If real, possessing them without authorization is a federal offense. The former president smiled thinly. "That's your response? Legal threats? Not addressing what's in them?" She removed her glasses carefully. "What exactly do you want?" "The truth. An acknowledgement that what you told the American people wasn't the whole story. That you knew within hours it was a planned terrorist attack, not a spontaneous protest over some video. That security concerns were raised and ignored months before the attack." She leaned forward slightly. "Politics requires difficult decisions. Information management during a crisis is complex. You should know that better than most. This goes beyond politics," he countered. 4 Americans died that night. Their families deserved the truth, not a convenient narrative. Her aide whispered something in her ear. She nodded slightly before turning her attention back to the former president. "Let's say, hypothetically, that these documents are authentic. What do you plan to do with them?" "That depends on you," he replied. "I'm giving you an opportunity here, a chance to control how this information comes out, to provide context before it becomes public. You're planning to release them regardless. The American people deserve to know what really happened, how it was covered up, how investigations were misled." She was silent for a long moment, studying him. "You realize what you're doing? The impact this could have?" "I do." "And the source of these documents? You're protecting them?" The former president nodded. "For now, though they've indicated they may be willing to come forward eventually." Something flickered across her face. Concern, perhaps even fear. It was gone so quickly he almost missed it. "I need time," she said finally, "to verify these myself, to review my records from that period." "You have 48 hours, he replied. "After that I move forward with or without your input." She closed the folder and tried to slide it back to him, but he raised his hand to stop her. "Keep it. Those are copies. Show them to whoever you need to, but remember, I have the originals and more besides." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "This feels like blackmail." "It's accountability," he corrected. "Something Washington could use more of." The meeting ended shortly after. As they left the hotel through separate exits, the former president felt a curious mix of emotions. Satisfaction at finally confronting her, concern about what would come next, and a nagging worry about the anonymous source who had set all this in motion. Back in the SUV, his chief of staff looked troubled. "She took it better than I expected. Too well, maybe." "She's calculating her options," the former president replied, "figuring out how to get ahead of this, how to spin it, or how to discredit it entirely. We need to be prepared for that." "Yeah." Former president nodded grimly. "That's why we're moving quickly. I meant what I said. 48 hours, then we go public. No more delays, no more secrets." As the motorcade pulled away, he glanced back at the hotel. Somewhere inside, his longtime political rival was undoubtedly already making calls, activating her network, preparing her response. The next 2 days would determine whether this confrontation would end with truth finally coming to light, or with yet another layer of politics obscuring what really happened on that tragic night years ago. Either way, there was no turning back now. The documents were real. The meeting had happened. And soon, the American people would be presented with evidence that would force them to reconsider a piece of history they thought they already knew. Retry Tico long. Whatever came next, there would be no going back. Be seen. The 48 hours passed like a slow-motion hurricane. The former president barely slept, constantly checking his phone for updates from his team or new messages from the anonymous source. The source had gone silent since the meeting in Washington, a worrying development that left everyone on edge. Nothing, the intelligence expert reported during their early morning briefing. No new communication since yesterday. Either they've gone to ground or he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They all understood the risks for whoever had leaked these documents. The former president paced the length of the secure room, coffee cup in hand. Any unusual activity around her? Phone calls, meetings, travel? His chief of staff consulted a tablet. She's canceled 2 public appearances. Her foundation issued a statement saying she has a mild case of bronchitis. Our sources say there have been multiple visitors to her home, including her longtime attorney and at least 2 former State Department officials who served during that period. She's assembling her defense team, the former president muttered, getting their stories straight. The lawyer, who had been quietly reviewing documents in the corner, finally spoke up. The deadline we gave her expires at noon. We need to decide how we're proceeding. The former president checked his watch. 3 hours remained. She won't reach out, he said confidently. Not directly. That would signal weakness. If she makes any move, it'll be through intermediaries, probably with some kind of threat or inducement to keep this quiet. As if on cue, his private phone rang, a number he didn't recognize but with a Washington, D.C. area code. He put it on speaker. "This is a courtesy call," began a male voice, smooth and practiced, the kind of voice that belonged in wood-paneled rooms where real decisions were made. "I represent certain interests in Washington, and who feel that the course of action you're considering would be destabilizing to our political institutions." The former president exchanged glances with his team. "And you are?" "A concerned party with the ability to ensure your business interests receive favorable regulatory treatment in the coming years, or not, depending on certain choices." The former president's face hardened. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm suggesting that patriotic Americans sometimes put country above personal vindication. The documents you possess, while perhaps technically accurate, lack crucial context that only those who lived through those difficult days can provide. Their release without that context would create a distorted picture." "The truth doesn't need context," the former president shot back. "It just needs to be told." "Everything needs context," the voice replied calmly. "History most of all. I'm authorized to offer you something in exchange for your discretion. I'm not interested in deals." "Everyone's interested in deals. It's just a matter of finding the right one." The voice paused. "What if certain investigations into your business practices were to disappear? What if certain tax questions were permanently resolved in your favor?" The former president laughed without humor. "Now who's lacking context? I've been fighting these people for years. What makes you think I'd stop now when I finally have something they fear? Because you're a practical man. You understand cost-benefit analysis. The benefit here is considerable. The cost of proceeding..." Another pause. "Well, your source has already gone silent, hasn't he? People who cross certain lines tend to reconsider when the full implications become clear to them." The former president's blood ran cold. "What do you know about my source?" "Only that they've been reminded of their obligations, their oaths, the consequences of breaking them." "Is that a threat?" "Merely an observation." The voice remained unruffled. "You have until noon to reconsider your position. After that, certain options may no longer be available to you." The line went dead. The room remained silent for several seconds. "They got to our source," the intelligence expert said finally. "That's why we haven't heard anything. Or worse," the chief of staff added grimly. The former president slammed his coffee cup down, liquid sloshing over the rim. "This ends today. No more delays, no more threats. We go public at noon, as planned." The next 2 hours were a blur of activity. Final preparations were made for what they were now calling the disclosure. The documents had been organized into a clear narrative, with annotations explaining their significance. A website had been prepared to host the entire collection, set to go live at precisely noon. Selected journalists from across the political spectrum had been privately contacted, told only that a major story would be breaking that they wouldn't want to miss. At 11:30, the former president retreated to his private office to prepare for the press conference scheduled for 1 o'clock. He would give the media 30 minutes to digest what was being released before he spoke publicly. He was reviewing his remarks when his chief of staff burst in without knocking, something he never did. "You need to see this," he said, turning. On the television, the screen showed a breaking news banner. The anchor looked grave as she reported, "We're following developing news about a serious car accident involving a former State Department official. The vehicle reportedly went off the road in Virginia, crashing into a ravine and catching fire. Authorities have not yet identified the victim, but sources close to the investigation tell us it was a senior diplomatic security officer who served during the Benghazi incident." The former president stared at the screen, a chill running through him. "That's not a coincidence." "No," his chief of staff agreed. "It's a message. They're warning us what happens to people who talk." The lawyer entered, looking equally concerned. "We need to delay. If they're willing to go this far." "No." The former president's voice was firm. "That's exactly what they want. To scare us into backing down." He checked his watch. "It's 11:45. Release everything now. Don't wait until noon." His chief of staff hesitated. "Are you sure? Once this is out?" "I've never been more sure of anything. This isn't just politics anymore. This is about power and accountability, about who really runs this country." The former president's eyes were fixed on the television, where they were now showing aerial footage of the crash site. "Make the call. Release it all." Within minutes, the documents were live. The carefully constructed website began receiving its first visitors. The former president watched on a monitor as the visitor counter jumped from dozens to hundreds to thousands in mere minutes. Email alerts went out to journalists. Social media began to light up with the first reactions. Then his phone rang again, the same unknown number as before. "You've made a serious mistake," the voice said without preamble. "The only mistake was thinking you could threaten me into silence," the former president replied. "You misunderstand. We don't threaten. We simply inform of consequences. Actions have them, you see. The accident this morning was unfortunate. More unfortunate events may follow." "Are you admitting to having someone killed to protect her?" A dry chuckle came through the speaker. "Nothing so dramatic. Accidents happen all the time, especially to people under stress, making poor decisions. Your source, for instance, is currently dealing with significant personal issues, financial troubles, health concerns. It would be a shame if those became overwhelming." The former president's grip tightened on the phone. "If anything happens to my source, I'll make sure the world knows who's responsible." "You don't even know who your source is," the voice countered. "Just an anonymous message, some documents that appeared mysteriously. Where's your proof of anything? Meanwhile, the documents you've released are already being discredited. Technical experts are pointing out inconsistencies. Former officials are going on record saying they're fabricated. By this evening, this will be just another conspiracy theory. The American people aren't that stupid. No. But they are that divided. Half will believe what they want to believe. Half will believe what they're told to believe. And in a week, some new outrage will capture their attention, and this will fade like everything else." As much as he hated to admit it, the former president knew there was some truth to this. He'd seen it happen before. Bombshell revelations reduced to partisan talking points, then forgotten. "Not this time," he said, more to himself than to the caller. "We'll see." The line went dead again. By noon, the documents had been downloaded thousands of times. Major news networks were breaking into regular programming to report on the release. The former president's press conference had been moved up to accommodate the earlier release. As he prepared to face the cameras, his phone buzzed with a text. Message from yet another unknown number. "I'm safe. Had to disappear for a while. They came looking, but I was prepared. What you released is just the beginning. Check your private email in 1 hour for the rest. The public deserves the whole truth, not just pieces." The former president felt a surge of relief followed by renewed determination. He straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and headed for the press room where dozens of reporters were already gathered. This was it. The moment of revelation, of truth, finally breaking through years of carefully constructed narratives. Whatever came next, history would record that on this day, the full story of what happened in Benghazi began to emerge from the shadows, not just for political gain, but because the American people deserved nothing less than the complete, unvarnished truth. Camera lights blazed as the former president approached the podium. The press room at his Florida estate had never held so many journalists. They packed the space shoulder to shoulder, equipment crowding every available inch. The air felt electric, charged with a mix of anticipation and skepticism. He adjusted the microphone and surveyed the room. Familiar faces from his time in office, new reporters he didn't recognize, and even journalists from international outlets who had flown in on short notice. Whatever people thought of him, and he knew opinions varied wildly, no one could deny his ability to command attention. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began. His voice was steady, measured, a tone he had practiced that morning. This wasn't a moment for his usual bombastic style. This required gravitas. Earlier today, my team released a collection of documents related to the Benghazi attack. These documents include emails, intelligence briefings, and classified communications that were supposedly destroyed years ago. They reveal a pattern of deliberate misinformation provided to Congress and the American people about what happened that night and in the days that followed. Cameras clicked rapidly. Reporters scribbled notes. No one interrupted. I want to be absolutely clear. These documents have been authenticated by multiple experts. Their digital signatures match State Department protocols from that time. Their content aligns with what several officials from that period have privately confirmed. They are real. He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. For years, we've been told that what happened in Benghazi was a spontaneous protest that got out of hand. These documents prove that senior officials knew within hours that it was a coordinated terrorist attack. We've been told that all possible security measures were in place. These documents show repeated requests for additional security that were denied or ignored. We've been told there was no stand-down order. These documents suggest otherwise. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. Mr. President, the State Department has already issued a statement calling these documents sophisticated forgeries created to mislead the American people for political purposes. How do you respond? The former president had expected this. Of course they're saying that. What else could they say? The truth would be far too damaging. But I invite any independent expert to examine these documents. We've posted the complete technical verification, details online alongside the documents themselves. The evidence speaks for itself. Another reporter stood. Sir, sources close to the former Secretary of State are suggesting you're doing this to distract from your own legal troubles. Your response? A flash of anger crossed his face, quickly controlled. This isn't about me. It's about 4 Americans who died serving their country and the lies told in the aftermath. It's about accountability. Something Washington has been sorely lacking. Questions came rapidly after that. He fielded them with unusual patience, referring frequently to specific documents, citing page numbers and timestamps that demonstrated his command of the material. 30 minutes into the press conference, his chief of staff approached the podium and whispered something in his ear. The former president's expression changed subtly, a look of surprise followed by satisfaction. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been informed that my source has provided additional documents, which we are making available online now. These include internal communications about how to manage the narrative in the days following the attack. I encourage you all to review them carefully. A murmur ran through the press corps as reporters checked their phones and tablets. 1. Last thing before I take more questions, the former president continued. My source has also authorized me to reveal that they were present in the room when the decision was made to blame the attack on a video rather than acknowledge it as terrorism. They are willing to testify under oath to Congress about what they witnessed. This announcement sent the room into a frenzy. Reporters shouted questions simultaneously. Cameras flashed and producers in the back frantically called their newsrooms. The former president raised his hands for quiet. I'll take 2 more questions, then we'll end for today. A veteran reporter, who had covered Washington for decades, stood up. Sir, you met privately with the former Secretary of State before releasing these documents. Can you tell us what was discussed in that meeting? I showed her a small portion of what we had. I offered her the chance to come clean voluntarily, to provide context or explanation. She declined. And her reaction? The former president allowed himself a small smile. Let's just say she recognized the documents immediately. She didn't question their authenticity until after she left the room. The final question came from a young reporter in the back. Mr. President, there are reports of a suspicious car accident involving a former State Department security official this morning. Do you believe there's a connection to these documents? The media room fell silent. This was dangerous territory, the kind of question that normally would have been dismissed as conspiracy thinking. But the timing was undeniably suspicious. The former president gripped the edges of the podium. I'm aware of the accident. I'm also aware that 3 people connected to these events have experienced unusual personal difficulties in recent weeks. I don't believe in coincidences of this magnitude. I've instructed my security team to take additional precautions, and I've arranged for my source to be protected. With that, he thanked the press and left the podium, ignoring the shouted follow-up questions. Back in his private office, his team waited with updates. The intelligence expert spoke first. The reaction is even bigger than we anticipated. Every major network is covering it. Social media is exploding. The website has crashed twice. From traffic, the lawyer looked more concerned. The pushback is also stronger than expected. They've mobilized every ally they have. Former officials are denouncing the documents as fakes. Technical experts are being quoted questioning the verification methods. What about the new documents? The former president asked. The ones that just came in? His chief of staff handed him a tablet. Even more damaging than the first batch, internal memos about coaching witnesses before congressional testimony, discussions about which emails to delete and which to turn over, and this, he pointed to a specific document on the screen. A direct order to blame the video, signed by her, dated less than 12 hours after the attack began. The former president studied it carefully. This is what they were really afraid of. This is why they tried to silence our source. Speaking of our source, the intelligence expert said, they've gone dark again, but they sent instructions for an emergency contact protocol if we don't hear from them within 24 hours. The former president nodded grimly. Keep trying the usual channels, and double the security here. If they were willing to stage an accident for a peripheral figure, there's no telling what they might try now. The hours that followed took on a surreal quality. The former president watched from his office as the story exploded across all media platforms. Old allies rallied to his side, praising his courage in bringing the truth to light. Political opponents denounced him as desperate and dangerous. Regular Americans seemed divided along familiar lines. Those who had always believed there was a cover-up felt vindicated. Those who had dismissed such claims as conspiracy theories remained skeptical. By evening, the story had evolved. Several former State Department employees had come forward anonymously, confirming key elements of the documents. A retired military officer who had been stationed in the region went on record saying he had been ordered not to speak about certain aspects of the response that night. The former president's phone rang constantly. Allies seeking guidance, journalists seeking exclusive comments, even a few former critics suggesting they had always had doubts about the official story. Just after midnight, as he prepared to finally get some rest, his secure line buzzed. It was the intelligence expert, his voice tense. You need to turn on the news, any channel. The former president grabbed the remote and switched on the television. Every network showed the same scene. A woman standing at a podium. Flashbulbs, illuminating her face as she spoke. His former rival addressing the nation at an emergency press conference. Cannot allow our political differences to undermine the foundations of our democracy, she was saying. These fabricated documents represent a dangerous new level of political warfare. They exploit the pain of 4 American families who lost loved ones in service to their country. They damage our standing in the world. and they erode public trust in our institutions. The former president watched, his expression hardening as she continued. I have therefore instructed my attorneys to file defamation charges first thing tomorrow morning. I've also called for a congressional investigation into how classified document templates may have been stolen and misused to create these forgeries. She looked directly into the camera, her voice steely with determination. To those who continue to spread these falsehoods, you will be held accountable. To the American people, I understand your confusion. When documents appear online that seem official, it's natural to question. But I stand by every word of my testimony, every action taken during that tragic time, and every effort made to bring the perpetrators to justice. The former president muted the television, a strange calm settling over him. She's scared, he said to the intelligence expert on the phone. This isn't the response of someone with nothing to hide. What's our next move? The intelligence expert asked. The former president walked to the window, looking out at the darkened grounds of his estate. Somewhere out there, beyond the security perimeter, forces were gathering against him. Powerful people with everything to lose were plotting their counterattack. His anonymous source was in hiding, possibly in danger, yet he felt oddly at peace. The truth was out now, imperfectly disputed, but out nonetheless. History would judge who was right. Now, he said quietly, we wait for the American people to decide what they believe, and we protect our source at all costs. The truth doesn't need our help anymore. It just needs time to sink in. As if confirming his words, his phone buzzed with a news alert. A congressional committee had just announced emergency hearings on the newly released documents. 3 former officials had already agreed to testify. The wheels of accountability, so slow to turn, were finally in motion. Outside, the first light of dawn